As a UFC fan, I think we always love it when there's a belt on the line or if there's legacy on the line. But honestly, the most important thing when it comes to building hype for a fight is just pure unadulterated hatred. In this video, Tony Has Died, will be breaking down the top 10 rivalries in the UFC. These are matchups that went beyond the octagon, were personal grudges, trash talk, most importantly, unforgettable fights, kept us on the edge of our seats. Let's get straight into it. The first entry in this list, which is Dominick Cruz versus Team Alpha Male. So this rivalry all began in 2007 when a young Dominick Cruz was on a pretty good win streak, ended up fighting Uriah Faber, who was the poster boy for the WEC, and he was the founder of Team Alpha Male. Cruz ended up getting choked out in the first fight in 2007 in under 2 minutes. I feel like this kind of just built an unadulterated hatred in Dominick Cruz, because then the next years of Dominick Cruz's life would be devoted to destroying everything that Uriah Faber built. Cruz did not forget what Uriah Faber did to him, and so he beat Joseph Benavidez twice, who was one of the toughest fighters out of Team Alpha Male. He rematched Faber at UFC 132, ended up winning that fight, and Cruz was making fun of Faber and his training style, calling Team Alpha Male predictable and one-dimensional, mentally weak, and he said they're all carbon copies and he's here to cleanse them all. Then the rivalry would begin to heat up a little bit more. So TJ Dillashaw was one of the best fighters in Team Alpha Male until he wasn't. He would end up leaving Team Alpha Male to fight against them. So Cruz sees this and he pours gasoline on the fire, basically calling Dillashaw a snake, and it's kind of where the whole TJ Snakeshaw, Pillashaw fucking insults came from. He basically said that nobody in Team Alpha Male had loyalty, right? Cruz ends up fighting Dillashaw and he beats him in a close split decision, but he clearly won in my opinion. Then he rematched Faber and ended the trilogy and defeated Faber again. Cody Garbrandt, he was the next generation of Team Alpha Male, and he hated Cruz as well. In the build-up, they started trash talking each other. Cody's not as good at trash talk as Cruz, but it didn't matter because Cody put on one of the best performances in UFC history. Well, not really, it was 3-2, but he was dancing all over, emoting on Cruz. Cruz ended with a 5-2 record against Team Alpha Male. Basically, this is one of the best rivalries in UFC history, even though he lost the last fight to Garbrandt. All right, let's move on to the next rivalry. Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway. Alexander Volkanovski, young up-and-coming prospect, defeats Jose Aldo to get his title shot against Max Holloway. A lot of people thought that Max would just ultimately end up destroying Volkanovski just like he destroyed every single other person in the division. But it turns out Volkanovski was the perfect fighter to destroy Max Holloway. The first fight ended up being very razor close, and a lot of people ended up calling it a robbery, even though I think it's a clear Volkanovski win. Max gets an immediate rematch. People are calling Volk pillow hands, whatnot. They end up having an even closer fight. In the second fight, Max drops Volk multiple times, and I honestly scored this fight for Max. Max no longer gets a rematch because he already got his rematch, so then he has to prove that he's still worth the rematch. So after the second fight, Max Holloway fights Calvin Kattar and destroys him in one of the worst beatdowns in UFC history. Yair Rodriguez goes to a very close fight with Max, but Max ends up winning that fight as well. In the meantime, Volkanovski defeats Brian Ortega and he defeats the Korean Zombie in dominant fashion. So the trilogy fight is made even though Max Holloway is down 2-0, and Volkanovski just shows why he's on another level than Holloway and absolutely destroys him in the third fight. Pieces him up, puts him on a t-shirt, shows why he is the superior fighter and why he defeated Max Holloway 3 times. So even though Volk beat Max 3 times, I still think that this trilogy was one of the best trilogies in UFC history. Let's move on to the next one. So when we think of Chael Sonnen, we don't really think of him as one of the best fighters of all time, unless we're talking about his rivalry with Anderson Silva, in which he kind of proved that he was a high-level fighter at that time. So in 2010, Anderson Silva was on an 11-fight win streak, 7 title defenses, finishing legends with ease. Chael Sonnen opens his fucking mouth. He starts trash talking him. Anderson Silva, you absolutely suck. You know, making fun of Brazil, saying he owns Brazil, you know, making fun of his family, telling his wife he's going to cook her mistake. Chael and Anderson end up fighting, and Chael dominates the first fight for the first 4.5 rounds until he gets caught in a triangle choke and taps to Anderson Silva. Then the rematch happens. Chael just continues upping his trash talk, talking smack. Once the rematch happened, it was night and day who was the better fighter. Anderson Silva destroyed Chael in the rematch, so puts it into this rivalry. I think the trash talk and iconic moments that Chael brought, and you know, just the crazy moment with the first fight, deserve it to be on this list. Let's talk about the next fight on this list, which is, this one is kind of underrated. I think people sleep on this rivalry a lot. Demetrius Johnson versus Adriano Moraes. All right, I don't think that there was a lot of trash talk between these two, but the actual moments that were made between these two is what makes it so good. Demetrius Johnson, who has never been finished in his entire career, gets knocked out for the first time against Adriano, and it just shows how good of a fighter DJ is, because Moraes is so big compared to DJ. The rematch gets booked and DJ knocks out Moraes. So now it's 1-1 and they both have KOs. Moraes ends up earning a third fight and Demetrius just beats the shit out of him. Kind of similar to the Max Volk fight trilogy, but there are actually finishes in this trilogy. Yeah, I really do think this is like the finishes that happened in this trilogy went super viral. I remember seeing DJ get knocked out for the first time and I was just like, damn, you know. I think this rivalry definitely deserves to be mentioned when talking about the greatest rivalries of all time. Let's move on to the next one, which is Matt Hughes versus George St. Pierre. The story of this is 23-year-old GSP, 3-0 in the UFC, gets thrown into the fire within a title shot against Matt Hughes, the most dominant welterweight in MMA history. GSP was very talented, but he ended up losing to Hughes, tapping out in the first round. So then the rematch happens. GSP goes on a crazy win streak. 2006 UFC 65, GSP earns another title shot. From the opening bell, GSP just goes out there. He lands a crazy head kick on Matt Hughes in round 2 and finishes him with ground and pound. Round 3, the trilogy, they meet up one final time. Hughes is just not the same person he was whenever he fought GSP the first time. In the second round, GSP locks up an armbar, the exact same move that Hughes used to beat GSP in their first fight. Basically, the student becomes the master and the rest is history. George St. Pierre goes down as one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. So next rivalry on this list, number 5 on this list, we got Colby Covington versus Kamaru Usman. These fights were filled with some of the greatest trash talk. Not just the trash talk, but the fights themselves were so good. Two guys kind of known for boring styles at the time that they fought each other decided not to wrestle, to just stand and bang with each other. Kamaru Usman just proved to be the better fighter in both their fights. First fight kind of has some controversy in it because there was like a nut shot that hit Usman's body, but he gets a timeout. Colby was backing Usman down on the feet. Usman uses it as an excuse to like get a break. He ends up breaking Colby's jaw and the fight gets stopped. Second fight comes around. Colby gets the rematch and the fight is just as good as the first one. They don't fucking shoot takedowns. I think Colby shoots some takedowns, but none of them like hold Usman down really. They just stand and bang with each other, and honestly Colby could have gotten the nod in this fight, but he got dropped twice in one of the rounds. And not even to mention all the out of cage antics, like the whole fucking press conference, you know, Colby saying that Usman's dad's in jail and that Usman's wearing a sheet, all the trap. This is where Colby became Colby, you know. So Colby versus Usman, definitely on my list. Next one, we got Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz. Liddell and Ortiz basically used to be primary training partners with each other, and they were like the only two big stars that the UFC had with each other. But as Liddell kept winning and Tito held the title, people started saying that this fight needed to happen. Tito claimed that Chuck Liddell was his friend and he didn't want to fight him, and then Chuck draws the line and says, Tito's not my friend, he's just scared of me. In 2004, the first fight took place. Tito held his own, but in the second round, Chuck Liddell knocks him the fuck out. UFC 66 happens. Chuck Liddell was still reigning champ, one of the most feared KO artists in MMA. Doesn't matter for Tito Ortiz because Liddell flatlines him again, 2-0. Chuck Liddell and Tito fight a third time. Nobody really counts this because it was like out of both of their prime. So when they were both in their prime, Chuck Liddell beat Tito Ortiz twice. Tito Ortiz ends up knocking out Chuck Liddell in a fight in 2018. Chuck Liddell had no business fighting when he was this old. But still, the trash talk and build up to their first two fights were good enough for me to put them into this list. Next one on this card, I don't think two human beings have hated each other more than the number 3 on this list, which is Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. This rivalry still continues to this day. Khabib just said today on Twitter, I beat someone I don't like and I build my gym with the money from it. It's a great life, you know. Then the whole Paul Hughes situation with Usman Nurmagomedov, that was happening as well. Ireland versus Russia 2 in PFL. So this was just going to be a normal fight for Conor on his way back. These guys actually knew each other and had like pictures with each other. Beforehand, they were cool with each other. But then all hell broke loose when one of Conor's friends named Artem Lobov started getting harassed by people on Khabib's team. I'm not sure exactly what ignited the initial hatred between Arman and Team Khabib. Arman calls Conor. Conor loads up a bunch of his buddies on a jet, flies to New York City, and then a dolly gets thrown into a bus. The reason that this rivalry isn't number 1 on my list is because they only had one fight. Khabib ends up submitting Conor McGregor round 4. Competitive rounds before this, Khabib gets it done, drowns Conor, chokes him out. But then what really sets it off, Khabib jumping the cage and attacking Dylan Dennis. This fight was just crazy. The buildup was crazy. The aftermath was crazy. The hatred between these two, it's like I've never seen before. So Khabib versus Conor, number 3 on my list. Number 2 on this list, which is the rivalry between Jon Jones and DC, is the most intense, bitter, and emotionally charged feud in UFC history. It was fucking real. It was ugly. These guys hated each other. Truly hated each other. This wasn't about belts. This was just about fucking personal spite and hatred for each other. So by 2014, Jon Jones was already a dominant champion. He beat Shogun, beat Lyoto Machida, beat Rampage Jackson, beat Rashad Evans. DC was an undefeated Olympic wrestler, moved down from heavyweight to chase 205 because his buddy Cain Velasquez fought at 265. So at the press event that year that they did for all like the UFC fights, they, actually ended up fighting each other on stage, pushing each other, shoving each other, suits flying off. It was fucking chaos. They do like a ESPN like show together, but they didn't know that the cameras were rolling. And Jon Jones is like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And DC is like, no, you're not gonna kill me, Jon. He's like, oh no, I would literally kill you. I wish I could come outside and spit in your fucking face, dude. Like, these guys hated each other. They didn't know the cameras were rolling and they were talking shit to each other. So UFC 182 happens. First fight, Jon ends up winning. 5 brutal rounds, clear decision who won. Jon Jones fucking crotch chops after defeating DC. No respect. So then Jon Jones fails a drug test for cocaine and later gets stripped of the title that year for a felony hit and run where he fucking hit a pregnant lady with his car and drove off. So then DC fights for the vacant belt, submitting Anthony Johnson, but fans won't let him forget that fucking Jon won the first fight. Jones returns in 2016 after his suspension is over to fight OSP for the vacant belt, but he didn't look very good in the fight, so a lot of people were thinking that DC could end up winning. But only 2 days before UFC 200, Jon Jones fails a drug test And DC has to fight Anderson Silva on short notice for UFC 200. So Jones gets suspended once again. So then Jones versus DC 2 happens. And DC wins round 1. Fight is razor close, but then Jones lands a beautiful head kick, sent DC wobbling to the ground. Jones follows up, finishes him. DC is left crying, concussed, has no idea what's going on. John Jones gets stripped again, this fine for turnable. The win gets turned into a no contest. DC was reinstated as champ. Jones says he never cheated, but everybody knows he did. That is number 2 on this list. The number 1 rivalry in UFC history, in my opinion, Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya. This is the most storybook, legendary rivalry that has ever taken place in the history of the UFC, and it birthed a fucking superstar in Alex Pereira. So everyone knows Alex Pereira defeats Adesanya in kickboxing match the first time, and then in the second time, first time is like a very close fight. A lot of people think it's a robbery. Second time, Alex Pereira starches Izzy out cold. Famously, Alex Pereira's kids danced on Israel Adesanya's body while the scorecards are getting read. Adesanya goes to the UFC and creates an amazing legacy, defeating Yoel, defeating Robert Whittaker, defeating Marvin Vettori. He is the most dominant middleweight champion at this point. And this guy, Alex Pereira, has a couple MMA fights. Every time that Adesanya wins, Alex Pereira tweets about it. So then Adesanya's doing an interview and someone just kind of mentions it, where he's like, what do you think about Pereira? You know, he beat you twice in kickboxing. He started doing some MMA fights. Adesanya famously says, whenever he's super famous, Pereira's just going to be sitting in a bar as an alcoholic trying to get his dick sucked by a crack whore. And Pereira takes that shit personally and starts locking in on MMA. Puts in some crazy fights at LFA. Pereira gets signed to the UFC. Beats Bruno Silva. Beats, I can't remember that guy he flying kneed. I can't remember his name. Then he knocks out Sean Strickland, which has aged very well for Pereira. Pereira versus Adesanya gets booked because there's not really anything left for Adesanya at middleweight at this point. It's 3-1 in the 5th round. Pereira locks the fuck in and knocks Adesanya out again. So now Pereira is up 3-0. So then they do an automatic rematch for Adesanya. And Pereira wins the first round. Second round, Pereira's winning again. He thinks he has Izzy hurt. He backs Izzy up against the cage. And then Izzy knocks him the fuck out cold. So, yes, it might be 3-1. It's 1-1 in MMA. That knockout from Adesanya was fucking crazy. He does the arrow emote that Pereira does when he's walking in the cage. He does it over Pereira's body. And then he emotes on Pereira's kids. Ultimate revenge story for Adesanya. But at the end of the day, Pereira proved that he's probably a better fighter than Adesanya. But you could say he was losing the first fight until he got the knockout. So both of them were losing their fights until they got the knockout. Yeah, man. But we also got the birth of Alex Pereira, who would end up going to light heavyweight, beating Yuri twice, beating Jan Blachowicz, beating Jamal Hill. Yeah, man. Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya. The best rivalry in MMA history, in my opinion. So, thank you guys for watching the video. If you liked the video, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.